Good day. It's Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. I am, of course, Cory Morgan. Happy hump day. Looks like winter's finally gotten to Alberta, and boy, it came with a vengeance, eh? For anybody out in the Calgary area, man, those roads are something special. Unless you're on the bike lanes, have a look at Dave Naylor. He tweets under Nobby, and he took that nice picture in Calgary. We keep our bike lanes spotless during the snowstorms. I mean, the streets, if you need an ambulance, fire truck, yeah. But hey, if you want a cargo bike or something, those bike lanes are immaculate. We got our priorities straight around here. Got a good show today. As always, like to think they're always good. And yes, we're streaming now on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, Rumble, and Telegram. We're all over the place. We're not kicked off anything right at the moment. I'll try and avoid getting kicked off anything in the near future. And it's good to see you all checking in. We got folks, Scott and Fort Mac, Debbie, I see Jet there, a couple folks from BC, Heather and Regina. I like seeing that comment scroll used, guys. Let's interact. That's the point of being live. Get those questions to me, have discussions with each other. Let's make this an interactive show. I won't necessarily respond to every comment. I do see them all, though, guys. And again, though, try to keep them fairly civil. So I've got some good guests on. Colin Craig of 2nd Street. He's been on before. They're a great group, a think tank, and they did a poll on healthcare and healthcare reforms and what people think. And, you know, despite what the unions say and the status quo protectors say, there might be a lot more appetite for some reforming of our healthcare system than others would let on. And they're reaching out to people getting past those interest groups, and it'll be a good conversation on healthcare. It can seem a little dry, but it's always the top political issue. And we'll have a business check-in with Marketplace Commodities at the end of the show. And I'm going to do something different. I'm going to start some awards. I'm going to be giving out the Dingleberry of the Week award. Every week, some lucky person is going to be awarded my Dingleberry award. And I won't give them a trophy to take home. But if any of them ever want to come in and receive the award in person after the fact, of course, they'll be more than welcome. I won't hold my breath. But yes, hang on for the end of the show. We'll have that. So let's get on to what the title's about and what I am ranting about. So, I mean, the cognitive dissonance, it was stunning to behold as President Biden berated oil and gas companies for their daring to make profits and apparently not investing properly into the USA. Now, this is in his own words. This is Biden. He said, the oil industry has a choice. Either invest in America by lowering prices for consumers at the pump and increasing production and refining capacity. That's a key part. Or pay a higher tax on your excessive profits and face other restrictions. The gall is beyond the pale. Maybe it's not so much cognitive dissonance as cognitive disability. That's an issue with Biden, leading Biden to chasing oil companies for not increasing production when he spent his entire presidency so far trying to force oil companies to lower production. Biden's very first act in office was to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline project. Billions of dollars had been invested and years dedicated to that line. It was killed by the president with the stroke of a pen. Biden was making it clear then and there that he would fight, if not outright block, any expansion of oil and gas infrastructure in the United States. And now here he is pissing and moaning and threatening to punish oil and gas companies for doing what he wanted them to. The idiocy of Joe Biden's approach runs deep and exposes a total lack of understanding of basic economics on Joe Biden's part. Oil and gas companies took a beating in the last decade. They lost billions of dollars while the oil prices were $10 and lower per barrel, and government regulations made production financially unviable. Now that they can finally recoup some of those losses, Biden's threatening to steal those profits from them through taxation. Now, if Biden hits oil companies with a punitive tax, guess what's going to happen? Those companies will reduce what expansion they're doing, and they'll cut their production. Why should they risk more dollars if the president's just going to steal the profit in anyway? Investors, of course, flee. Our current energy crisis is due to a lack of supply, and Biden's taking an approach that would actually reduce supply. And pouring more money into green renewables won't solve this problem. If that worked, Germany wouldn't be moving back into coal today for their energy sources after they've spent billions of dollars on wind and solar. Nationalizing the industry won't work. Just ask Venezuelans how that worked out. They have some of the richest oil reserves on earth and are suffering under fuel shortages and rampant poverty, of course. Only management of an industry can pull off such a disaster. They're literally ate their zoo animals there, guys. Governments need to get out of the way. They need to cut the onerous regulations dumped on energy companies and make investors confident that capital projects will be allowed to finish and that they can get a return on their investment. In other words, they need to do the opposite of what Biden's doing. Now let's pivot to our own domestic idiot who has a deficit in economic understanding as well. Yes, I'm talking about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And he's an impressionable little man he likes to follow. So rest assured, he's watching Biden and thinking about how he could implement a similar policy. Justin's father tried to take control of the energy sector with his disastrous national energy program. The NEP caused thousands of bankruptcies while bleeding Alberta of nearly $100 billion at the start of the 1980s. Justin would love to succeed where his father failed when it comes to energy. Unfortunately, Justin can only replicate what his father did. He can't make a national energy program work because the model is fatally flawed. Can we expect Trudeau to realize this, though? I wouldn't bet on it. Trudeau's still trying to borrow and spend Canada into prosperity. Inflation's running rampant, and the government's getting backed into a corner as the higher interest rates make servicing the federal debt untenable. Justin's going to be tempted to make a grab for Western resources, and he likely won't be able to resist himself. All we can do now is hope somebody somehow talks some sense into Joe Biden and gets him to reverse course. Otherwise, he and Trudeau will tag team to send North America energy capacity back into the dark ages as the winter approaches. Yes, guys, the truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, and that's what's got me wound up today. All right, let's bring in our news editor, Dave Naylor, and see what else is going on there.
Hey, good morning, Cory. That was quite a commute, wasn't it?
Oh, man, yeah, there's something on those roads right now. I see somebody else was wondering if I came in a convertible. The hair's looking a little wild. No, my hair always looks like crap, but I was just walking in the snowstorm from the parking spot to here. Yeah, I don't have a stylist here. But if you want to sponsor the show, we can get an in-house stylist and pretty me up.
There you go. We could all use it around here. Yeah, it took me 65 minutes to travel 23 kilometers, but arriving there at work today, like you said, just those beautifully cleared bike paths in Calgary. Didn't see a single snowplow, and also didn't see a single cyclist this morning, but holy cow, they were certainly clear and ready for them.
Yeah, it's I guess maybe, if you want to get to work faster, you should just drive on the bike lanes because, there's no bikes in them. I mean, they're wide open.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So anyways, on to more important things. The bear keeps coming back. I was thinking about you this week. We had the news of Fish and Wildlife killing 4 bears in a Calgary suburb. And I was thinking about your poor guy, keep coming back. Looks like the same fate may await him, but it looks like you may have at least pegged him a few times in the back there.
I don't know if those chunks of fur missing were from the rubber bullets I shot him with or if he's got mange going on. It does make me more concerned, actually, if he's injured or sick. And as you can see, he's pretty bold. That was the other night by my car and my fifth wheel there. He just wanders around. He just, now that I've taken to chasing him away, he just comes out a lot later in the night rather than at 9 like he used to. I hope we don't have to put him down.
All right, so the next question, you got a 4x4 there, you got a fifth wheel. Why the hell are you still here?
Well, I got an empty wallet. So once that fills up just enough to, oh, there we go. You see, I'm saving for my Happy Meal there. Yes, that's how you save money. And eventually in January, I will escape for a little bit. And we'll do some updates from the desert.
What the hell is that?
This is Banana Itchy Ban.
Oh, man.
That was a very popular tweet.
I'll bet it was, with disgust. Anyways, busy morning as usual around here, Cory. Leading off the website right now is a story on the Saskatchewan Public Safety Minister finally apologized for bringing convicted wife killer Colin Thatcher to the Saskatchewan throne speech. Amazing these politicians can't see potential problems in doing that. We've got a piece from our Lee Harding on the incredible Supreme Court of Canada decision last week that basically says the sex registry is unconstitutional. Well, he's got some politicians, a lawyer, and a former police officer who are not very happy with that. And boss man Derek's going to be having a column come out shortly, basically saying, register sex offenders. You don't need to register rifles. Preston Manning announced his citizen-led inquiry into Canadian government actions during COVID and the vaccine injured. People who have suffered injuries because of vaccines will be testifying at that inquiry. And we've got an interesting story, we'll call it, out of Strathmore, where somebody arrested was found to have thousands and thousands of dollars and more than 100 pills shoved up his bum. And they weren't noticed until he was in his cell by himself. And I didn't want to be the poor jailer who had to go in there and deal with that, Cory.
No, I mean, the guy's got quite a talent to pack that much away, I guess. Though I don't know how much a few thousand worth of drugs stacks up to, but, give the guy a little credit where due.
There is a picture to go along with the story, so you can take a look at it and see if you'd want to attempt the same thing.
Oh,
I know you were just speaking of President Biden. Our Mike Thomas will have a story out within seconds on a new survey showing it looks like a Republican sweep coming up next week in the midterms. So good news for Republicans in the States because they'll control both houses, and that'll basically cripple the last 2 years of the Biden presidency.
Well, yeah, the Americans like their conflict in there. We'll see what happens. Those midterms are creeping up quick.
They are.
All right. Well, thanks for checking in, Dave. And I like the beginnings of that mustache starting to sprout out.
By December, it may be even halfway good.
We'll see. We'll do one of those photo shoots. I saw something else that was going around with a mustached fella, but we'll save that for another show.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. As you see, lots out there, guys, and lots breaking. And that's because we cover the news, guys. We get it direct to you. This is where we pat ourselves on the back. I just like to remind everybody the reason we're doing all those stories, the reason we get those exclusives, we have those reporters all over the place, columnists, is through subscribers. That's the way we pay the bills. It's $10 a month, guys, $9.99 or $9.99, $10 a month, $100 if you take it out for a year. It's a good deal. It's cheaper than a newspaper subscription. It's a little more than, I guess, keeping a blue check on Twitter will be at $8 a month, which is apparently coming up. See, I need somebody at least to subscribe so I can pay for my blue check and keep it there because heaven forbid I lose that status symbol while I'm out there on Twitter. But either way, guys, seriously, this is how we can stay independent. This is how the media can cut through. So those of you who've subscribed already, thank you very much. We do very much appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, get on there, westernstandard.news/membership. Take out a subscription. Help support independent media. We refuse to take tax dollars. We will not take a nickel of tax dollars, any of those different subsidy programs and bailouts and all that. We rely on you, and it makes us accountable to you with our news. And, so, I mean, that segues into one of the stories I was looking to talk about with the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Now, this is a group of these press galleries or other reporters, senior reporters, columnists, and they have their own gallery and they determine who's allowed in and who's allowed out for those parliamentary press conferences and all that good stuff. It's quite a little inside club. And, I mean, I would rather that media members managed it than the government, absolutely. But the problem is now that, of course, most of our media takes subsidies. Well, then the ones who manage the gallery are biased, and there are a whole bunch of people who don't want to shake the tree where they're getting their money, which is the federal government. So it looks like the Blackhawks Reporter, you see, we get a lot of that. They're like a news aggregator. They've been doing a newswire. We get a lot of our material from them. They do excellent stuff, but they, of course, dig into things that embarrass the government quite often. But now the Parliamentary Press Gallery president is threatening to terminate Blacklock's membership in the press gallery because of disrespectful treatment of subsidized competitors. Oh, dear. In other words, they're making fun of you guys because you can't pay your bills by putting out good news. So you'd rather kick them out? You're just showing your own insecurity and weakness, the establishment legacy media, that sick media that doesn't give you direct information. It's just another example of it. And that's why the independent sources are so important. So let's look at some of the other stuff into the news. You might have heard some of the ads, and when I get on to Mr. Craig in a bit, we talk. It's an interesting area because, the healthcare, it's the top issue everywhere. The systems are having problems in every province. You listen to an opposition member in any province of any party, of course, they'll always blame whatever government in their province is for the problem. But it doesn't matter who is in power. In BC, the Liberals are blaming the NDP for the state of their healthcare. And here in Alberta, Rachel Notley's going wild because of UCP mismanagement of healthcare. And in Saskatchewan, the NDP are blaming the Sask party. It just goes all the way across. The bottom line is it's failing everywhere. It doesn't matter which party is in power. That's the common denominator, guys. If there was a magical formula within this system of making the healthcare work, one of the provinces would have found it by now. The problem is the system. And, you might have heard some ads. I guess it sounds like if you listen to the radio, you've heard some of these. I guess the premiers got together and they funded that. And they're pointing out something a lot of people don't realize. Provinces, they administer the healthcare, they manage it, they deal with it. But the funding, 50% of that was supposed to come from the federal government. According to the original Health Act, that's who's supposed to pay half of it. They're down to 22%. So you can't count on the federal government to fund your health care. And that's where I get a kick when you listen to people saying, well, we can't turn down this program from the feds, or we can't turn down that program from the feds because they won't give us the money. Well, that's where you got to remember, where do you think the money's coming from? So when you say we have to accept the government's, we have to start this arena deal in Calgary, say with a bunch of tax dollars, because if we don't, because the government's offering to pay for part of it, and they'll just burn that money, I guess, in a fire pit if we don't take it. No, they'll put it into something else. There's only one pot, guys, only one taxpayer. So when the healthcare has only got 22% of the funding coming from the feds, think about that. So if you want a nice big dental program like Jagmeet Singh's talking about, or you want to talk about the child care programs or all these other things, they force the provinces to opt in, because what they do is they say, here's the transfer we'll give you for it. And if you don't participate, we won't give you the money. Well, the thing is, it's still our money. And while they sit there and dangle those carrots in front of every province and make them dance to their tune, they're starving us on what their obligation is supposed to be on the healthcare front, because they aren't funding half of it like they're supposed to. Which I think, you know, that's part of what they like doing when provinces try to do something different. I remember the battles between Ralph Klein and Jean Chrétien when he was trying private MRIs and things like that. And Chrétien was threatening to cut health transfers because he felt he was outside of the Health Act. Well, what a rotten system this is. It forces you to be reliant on them for the funding, and you have to administrate it, though. You have to somehow make this system work. But if you don't do it under their rules, they'll punish you for it by cutting your funding. I don't know. Maybe it's better if the government, federal government, just goes to zero transfers, and then they won't be able to threaten us with it anymore. But the bottom line is it's costing us a whole lot of money, and it's not giving us any better outcomes. So I see Colin in the lobby there. I'm going to get to him. We're going to talk about that and some of the polling he's done on healthcare and reforms and talking to Canadians. First, let's see a quick ad from the Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.
All right, guys, if you enjoy your firearms, take out a subscription with them. Okay, so you can see in the studio, well, not in the studio, he's remote. He didn't drive through this snow and crap to get here today. We got Colin Craig from 2nd Street, and I've been looking forward to, I saw some of those poll numbers, and they're very interesting, Colin. So thanks for joining us today to talk about those.
Well, thanks for having me, Cory.
So, I mean, just to get right to it, I mean, you know, quite often, as I kind of said earlier in the show before you got on, there's people who always say that Canadians don't want any change in their health system. They're afraid of change. They want the status quo. They only want to spend more money on it. But when you've asked Canadians directly, they sound a little more receptive to some reforms than some people would make you believe.
Yes, for sure. It seems to be a case where Canadians are ahead of the politicians. And, you know, some of the polling that I've seen over the years suggests that Canadians have been ready for health reform for a long time now. Now, if we had been talking about 20 years ago, I think it was a different topic, because you know, people would talk about things like having private clinics outside of the public system, and it was a lot more taboo. Whereas I think over time, Canadians have had an opportunity to read lots of opinion columns, see lots of interviews, hear lots of discussions about different healthcare systems around the world, and understand that it's not an either or situation. We can have a universal public healthcare system, which is what Canadians like. This idea you can walk into a hospital and, you know, receive some kind of significant procedure and then walk out without facing a big bill. We can keep that option in place, but at the same time allow patients the choice. So if they don't want to wait a long time to get their knee or hip done, maybe they could go to a private clinic and pay privately. Governments could work with private clinics to reduce backlogs, all kinds of different reform options. Canadians, I think, are understanding that these things work in other countries that are not called the United States. You know, that we could bring them here. And that's really what our poll shows, is that Canadians are very much open to health reform if it can help patients.
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, not the United States. I mean, speaking of, you know, when we talk about a lot of binary, non-binary stuff, well, our healthcare isn't a binary discussion with systems. There's dozens of systems with a lot of innovative ideas. Some systems stink, some are very good, but we really have shunted our discussion and kind of closed it down for looking anywhere outside of North America. And that's putting us at a disadvantage.
Oh, 100%. That's why I say not the United States, tongue in cheek, of course, because for so long, opponents of health reform, people who like this sort of pseudo-government monopoly, they don't want to lose any control. So they've effectively tried to position this as Canada's system or the US model. But as you just noted, there's tons and tons of countries around the world with universal healthcare systems. We could be learning from them, understanding how they're delivering better care. And, really, I think that's what we need to do as a country, is to start to look at, what's happening in Sweden, on Australia, New Zealand, many other countries around the world that have that universal aspect that Canadians like, but ultimately deliver better results for patients.
Well, that word's the key part, because I think that's where a lot of the fear-mongering and misunderstanding comes. I mean, nobody's proposing to end the universal aspect of it. Nobody's saying we want to make it where if you don't have cash in hand, you won't get coverage. I mean, most people fully agree they want a system where you never have to sweat paying the bills because you need health care. So there'd be universal coverage. It's just changing how it'd be managed and delivered.
Yeah, exactly. And, even if someone did want to completely get rid of healthcare as we know it, it's a non-starter politically. There's not a single member of parliament in Ottawa that would stand up and say, let's get rid of it. There's no provincial government in the country, no major political party with any seats that would campaign on this. So politically, it's just not, it's pretty much impossible at the moment. And I would say for the foreseeable future, I don't think it's on anyone's radar. But yeah, like you said, I mean, we can reform the system and make sure that we keep that universal aspect that Canadians absolutely want, and find ways to deliver care better. And we threw out a couple ideas in our public opinion research to ask Canadians, well, what do you think about these ideas? So as I mentioned, this idea of, keeping the universal public healthcare system, but if a patient doesn't want to wait, say, a year in chronic pain for their hip operation, well, allow them to go to a private clinic where they could pay out of pocket. And a majority of Canadians support that idea, about 51%. So, we've seen that in the past, majority support that. I think the public is there, especially when they start to understand what that actually means. I mean, there's ways that other countries have put safeguards in place. The boogeyman argument is always that, well, everyone's going to leave the public system and go and work at the private system. And obviously that's not the case, because other countries successfully do this, and they often have some safeguards in place to say, okay, you can't work at a private clinic until you've done X number of hours in the public system each week or whatever. But, one important thing about this is that right now, a lot of surgeons will tell you that they have time on their hands, at least certainly before COVID, when all these backlogs emerged. But they had all this time on their hands because the governments wouldn't hire them to pay them what would be full-time work for a surgeon. They would only ration out a certain number of hip operations a year. So once the surgeon's done all those, he or she has time to kind of twiddle their thumbs, so to speak. So, there's certainly a lot of capacity within existing time that surgeons have to be able to work in both systems. And ultimately that would lead to more procedures being done, helping patients and so forth.
Yeah, well, that's where some of the, that's kind of the lowest you found in reforms, though, is the 51% talking about allowing people perhaps to pay to get in ahead in line. But, I think with more discussion, if people realize and they frame it the right way, they can embrace that. Like the way I look at it is, okay, I've been told I'll get my knee surgery in 6 months. But if I let that guy pay cash and get ahead of the line, my surgery would be reduced to 4 months. So if I could just swallow the envy, yes, he got in tomorrow, but he subsidized my getting in 2 months faster. Like, yes, I'm winning here. This is okay. And if people could kind of wrap it that way rather than trying to think of somebody jumping the line, I think you'd see more people realizing this is a better way to go.
Yeah, it's an absolutely huge benefit if we did that, because other patients would get to move ahead faster in line. It would also increase competition and innovation. When you have two different people doing the same task, well, that increases your chances that maybe one of them will find a better way to do it, and then they can both learn from it. I mean, this is how economies work in every industry, right? You see constant innovation over the years as new technologies are established and so forth. And, like I said, we got 51% support. I think if we had maybe rephrase the question a little bit to make it clarify that, it would involve keeping the public system, but allowing this on the side. I think that the public, if they fully understood what this is, I think we'd see support to be actually a lot higher. So it is, it's something I'm thinking about the next time we pose this question, is to reframe it a bit. But I think certainly the majority of the public is there.
Yeah, well, and one of the areas we had a stronger showing of support, or perhaps the strongest, was 72% support copying that European Union policy that allows patients to visit facilities outside of their provincial borders and get reimbursed later. And I mean, that one, I guess, if a province has, to say, a specialized clinic that has extra room in it, they can bring people from next door and then get reimbursed from the province later, and it still gets the faster care. It's sort of that sort of concept.
Yeah, it would depend how they implement it here. but I mean, you've done a pretty good job of explaining it. So the way it works in Europe is, let's say you're in Ireland and you're facing a 4-month wait for your knee surgery. And when the government would provide it to you, it would cost them, let's say, just to pick a number, 5,000 euros. Well, what you could do is, instead of waiting that 4-month waiting period, you could maybe go to another EU country like France and pay, let's say they're charging 4,000 or 5,000 euros for it. Well, you go there, you pay it, you come back to Ireland, the Irish government reimburses you for what you paid. Now, if you found a better deal and you paid less, let's say someone went to Estonia and got their knee surgery done there, well, then the Irish government would actually save money, because they would pay you that lower rate, the amount you actually paid. And then the opposite of that, of course, is if you went somewhere and you had to pay more than what your government would normally pay, well, then you would be responsible for the difference. But just having this funding mechanism in place for patients right now, to be able to go abroad and get the care they need instead of spending another year in chronic pain, off work, whatever. Canadians like this idea. And it's a way to get relief for patients immediately, to give them that option. It wouldn't be forced, to be completely voluntary. Patients would have that option. Not everyone's going to take the government up on it. But, you know, as we just talked about, when that happens, let's say the government subsidizes someone to go to wherever, Tennessee, to get their hip done. Well, then they go off of the public waiting list, and whoever's behind them in line gets to move up a spot. So, I mean, this policy is not perfect, but it's one I think that could help immediately reduce waiting lists in Canada. And at the same time, you'd help patients who decide not to go abroad for surgery. They would all get to move up in a spot in line. So, you know, the big question with this policy, Cory, is, well, what's the cost? And if you think about it, over a 2 or 3 year period, the cost is, there's no real increase, because what you're doing is you're changing the timing of when expenses occur. So instead of paying, say, $5,000 to, you know, fix your knee next year, the government would spend $5,000 this year. So over a 2 year period, the expenses are roughly neutral.
Yeah, and I mean, again, you see some of the concerns that come up, and it's fair enough. One of our commenters, Lori Dobby, saying the issue she sees is she or he, it's hard to tell, would be if people with money would be able to displace others in a wait list. And we sort of addressed that earlier. If it's shortening the list overall, it won't displace people on the list. It would just mean somebody else. But the waiting list, though, at least, you know, in addressing that, that's the problem. That's where our system is bottlenecked. And maybe if people understand too, like as you're speaking about, that the costs of somebody waiting, if somebody can't go to work because they're injured or sick, or they're only part-time, or they're not as productive. Another thing is they're being medicated, quite often pain medication, and that can lead to addiction or long-term issues, as well as quality of life. Like, we really need to cut those waits and start to examine how we can do it.
Yeah. And, you know, I agree with your point and Lori's. I think you both made good points there. Like you said, everyone could benefit, because people ahead of you in line who decide to do this, well, they get off of the waiting list. Everyone else gets to move up a spot who's behind them. Lori makes a good point, though, about cost. I mean, that's true. If, let's say that you need a, whatever, $30,000 hip operation somewhere, and you don't have access to being able to pay for that before you get reimbursed. That is a limitation, obviously, of this policy. But what this policy does do is, if you think about it right now, who has the money to go abroad for healthcare? Because we know hundreds of thousands of Canadians every single year are flying to other countries. They're driving across the border to the US. People with access to money are able to do this right now. And it's sort of that lower income and lower middle income people that often don't have the funds to be able to do that. This policy changes that. It gives them an opportunity to go abroad and get a subsidy, if not full cost coverage, for the procedure they require. There's a patient, I'll just give this quick anecdote. There's a patient from Manitoba named Max Johnson, and the CBC highlighted his story. What happened with him is he needed a knee replacement, and it was going to take, I think, something like a year or so waiting list in Manitoba. He ended up going to Lithuania, and after he paid for his knee surgery there, he compared that with what the Manitoba government would normally pay to get that procedure done for him. And he calculated that it was about $7,000 less in Lithuania. So if the Manitoba government had been subsidizing people to go to Lithuania for their knee surgeries, the government could actually save money. Patients who may not have, whatever amount of money to go abroad. If they had this subsidy in place, they might then be able to start to afford it. So, again, it's not a perfect solution, but it is a policy that could help right now. We're in a crisis. We need to think outside the box, and I think we need to pursue options that may not be 100% right on the money, but maybe are 90% of the way there. And I think this is one of them.
Well, I see you took advantage of, when you're doing the poll. The polls are expensive, especially when you get 1,500 people like that through, a good polling company. So you want to get all your questions in that you can. But this one's interesting. We're saying 66% believe that health ministers should have to hold a press conference every year and announce the number of patients who died the previous year due to long waiting lists. And, that's kind of getting outside of talking about the systemic reform, but a nice way to point out, like, people maybe don't realize just how backlogged the system is. I mean, if you've been fortunate enough not to have health issues, not have to wait for anything in the system, nobody in your family has had a problem, you might not realize how bad it's getting out there. So having these health ministers get up and tell you, by the way, this many people would be alive today if we could have sped up the system, it might add a little fire under some butts.
Yeah, it's a real serious problem right now, and this is you're right. This question's different from the others in that it's driving at accountability in the system. It's a sad fact that every single year there are patients in this country that die because the government made them wait too long for healthcare in Canada. Remember, the government has a monopoly on it. You cannot go to a private clinic and get a heart operation in this country because the government won't allow it. So the government is taking complete control over your access to healthcare. And when they essentially force a patient to die in a way because they're not able to get that care they need in time in Canada, well, that's a pretty serious problem. We've been trying to dig into this information. We do reports every year that are called died on a waiting list reports. And we gather government data on how this is happening. It's a bit difficult to get the numbers because governments don't track it very well, but it's a very serious problem. And so we've asked this question, well, should health ministers should have to stand up each year and explain to the public how many patients died under their watch because they had to wait too long? And this option is overwhelmingly a popular one with the public. Like you said, 66% agree with it. It's just a good accountability measure. I mean, obviously politicians love to get in front of the cameras and attract lots of attention when they're building a new hospital, when they're hiring new staff, whatever. They like to get a lot of attention to the good news. This would obviously be an accountability problem in some cases. The public wants to know about it. That's, I think, what that number shows.
Yeah, and now another thing that's interesting when we're talking about private clinics, is the pandemic crisis. I mean, that led to a lot of hospitals basically locking down. A lot of procedures got put off and pushed off because they were trying to quarantine the hospital spaces. And maybe there's this is kind of going outside of what your poll was asking about, but still, if we had a number of specialized private clinics, whether it was for dialysis or orthopedic surgery or other day surgeries, those areas could have continued to operate while the hospitals were still locked down with vulnerable patients within them. But because we have everything packed into a few giant hospitals, it made us a heck of a lot more vulnerable when a pandemic came around. I'm just saying that there's benefits we could see from spreading our system out a little more rather than having it packed into one central location like that as well.
Yeah, you're 100% bang on. This is a very serious problem, I think, in Canada, is that so often when you need to get your knee or your hip done, or maybe you're an expectant mother and you're giving birth, you're going into that hospital building. Often it's the same building and complex where you've got people going in because they've got COVID or the flu or some kind of other disease or something that can spread. And sometimes those infections happen, right? And when you keep the healthy people, if you're pregnant, you're healthy. If you need your knee done, you're healthy. You have this other problem, right? You're not contagious. So if you had those procedures taking place in private clinics, at least if you had that option, then I think you could help spread some of those viruses and that from being transmitted.
Yeah, well, we're kind of, going, I guess, a different route. Rather than lobbying the politicians, you're talking to the public. Because as you said, the public's kind of ahead of the politicians on this one. If they can realize there's an appetite for this among the electorate, maybe they'll be ready to take it on. But I mean, there's clashes that could come with the Canada Health Act. So would it be time to start calling for maybe reforming that act a little to allow a little more flexibility?
I think so. Yeah. And I mean, you talked earlier about the funding of healthcare in this country and how it used to be sort of 50-50. Now it's down to 20-some%. that the federal government's contributing. The vast majority is coming provincially. The great hindrance is that when provincial governments try to experiment a bit, you know, we talked earlier about innovation, when they try to innovate and try doing things differently to try and improve services. Well, if Ottawa doesn't like it, they can come in with the hammer and say, well, we're going to cut your funding. Now, it's only 20%, but that's 20% that provincial governments need. So, you know, if you did reform the Canada Health Act, I think you could make sure some of the language is clear so that provincial governments have the opportunity to innovate while keeping that universal aspect that, you know, Canadians overwhelmingly like. So I think there's an opportunity to reform the Health Act. And if you did, you could ultimately improve the outcomes for patients.
Well, and we have to start with somewhere. As I said, the politicians will move when their own electoral butts get on the line. So, you know, you guys are doing good work and getting the public working up on it, and, you know, and realizing that we've got to examine new things. You've been doing other things with Second Street before I let you go too. You know, your Survivors of Socialism series and a number of other things. Do you want to let us know a little bit more about the work you do before you go?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, we did a series called Survivors of Socialism, where we talked to Canadians who came from socialist and communist countries, where we heard their stories. And we also surveyed them to say, you know, are there any policies in Canada that concern you because they remind you of the countries that you fled? And so, yeah, we got some interesting responses there. People can check that out. We've been doing public opinion research on the oil and gas sector and what Canadians think about developing and exporting more of our resources so that the world can buy from us instead of Russia. And obviously the huge benefit of that is if the world doesn't have to keep giving money to Putin for energy, well, then he has fewer dollars to buy tanks and rockets and invade countries like Ukraine and what other countries that may be on his list to invade next. So we've been doing projects like that. We've got lots of stuff on our website, and obviously people can find it at secondstreet.org.
Excellent. Well, I always appreciate you coming in. I really liked the poll you did, you know, and getting some of that good information directly from Canadians. So thanks for coming on to talk to us today about it, and keep up the good work.
Thanks a lot, Cory. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. So that was Colin Craig with Second Street. And as he said, you can find him at secondstreet.org. And it's not just healthcare, as we said, all sorts of things they do, the Survivors of Socialism, things like that. Some good common sense talk, you know, from one of these think tanks. You know, some of the discussion coming, like Tammy Drobe be saying, but all these points are moot. I guess healthcare doesn't want to pay for procedures. The capacity, if the capacity is there, why would healthcare pay for procedures done sooner in other countries? But, you know, the thing is, we don't have the capacity. The goal, I think, though, is to get more domestic capacity. Absolutely. And the thing is, people are going anyway. We like to think that if they're still going to save to some degree, if we could shake up management, they might, you know, embrace more creative ways of saving money. And that's part of what's good with, I like seeing that AHS in Alberta, Danielle Smith is shaking them up, because these health administrations are rotten. They're bloated, they're bureaucratic, they're pulled by the unions, they're pulled by ideology rather than patient needs. And you really need to flush those health system toilets and, you know, get reform in there. So if they could find a faster way. But something I found, you know, exciting, I talked about on here a little while ago, was the Enoch Reserve just outside of Edmonton. And it's Billy Morin, and he's actually, I believe, on Danielle Smith's staff now too. He was the chief for that reserve. And they're building a private healthcare facility. And I tell you what, Rachel Notley, who's, you know, beholden to her unions, she's NDP, she's got to do what she's told by Jagmeet and what she's told by Gil McGowan and the union leaders. That's all in the NDP constitution. I've talked about that before. She, of course, goes haywire over every possible private facility providing care, except for the one on the reserve. Because, you know, one thing they're terrified of is First Nations getting into business. So, you know what? Good. Bring it on. Let's do it. I'd like to see one in the Sutina Reserve too. Build some private healthcare facilities on there. You guys can do it. It's good for the reserve. It brings some local commerce there. It's next to the cities. It gets us faster care. And it shuts up the socialists because they're scared of you. So we can all benefit. And I'll talk at the end of the show quickly too about the guests I have next week. But we're talking about an Aboriginal, First Nation coalition with businesses who are looking to build an energy corridor to get to Hudson's Bay and get our product out there. You know, we're getting blocked everywhere else. Well, why don't we get it to the port in Hudson Bay? We'll talk about something else. I see Cheryl saying WS caved to Facebook pressure and didn't punish the embalmers, finding story by Horwood. You know, I wasn't privy to that particular one, but I can tell you it's difficult for us. It really is. It's not so much, well, I guess it is FB pressure, whatever way you want to put it. But we are reliant on those social media giants. We can only reach out so much. And actually, the vast majority, our biggest one of all the social media giants, we get some people in from LinkedIn, we get some from Twitter, we get them from Google searches. We get people to the Western Standard site all sorts of ways. But Facebook is huge. And unfortunately, yeah, Facebook censors. And if we put some of the wrong stuff up, we can get canceled and kicked off. And it's not a matter of us caving to pressure. It's a matter of us paying the bills. Like, we can't afford. They've got us by the short and curlies. I hate to admit it. I hope that changes. I hope seeing things like Elon Musk shaking things up at Twitter helps change these social media giants a little bit to allow more open discussion. As some of you viewers know, we've been sporadically kicked off of YouTube here, and we lose a lot of viewers every time that happens. When we do broadcast to Rumble and we go to the other sites, but YouTube, it's the big one. So we're trying. We really are. We want to get as much stuff out as we can. I would say get directly to westernstandard.news. Get to those stories. Follow Matthew Horwood on Twitter. He's been really following some really good in-depth stories on things, and things with I can't even say it on here. We're going to end up getting kicked off YouTube. But follow Matthew Horwood. Check those things out. We are covering it, guys, and we're covering it as well as we can within the unfortunate limits that we have with Facebook and the rest of the social media giants out there. All right, let's see some of the other stuff. So here's a report from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. This one's interesting, and it kind of ties into a number of stories. So it says 252 current or former school personnel committed or were accused of committing offenses of sexual nature against 548 children over a 5-year span. Now, with millions of kids in school, thankfully but I mean, this report, she's also saying it's the tip of the iceberg. There's far, far more than that going on, but that's what they got from the report. 38 criminally charged. A few things. One of the things that I hope Danielle Smith remains strong as premier on it, that the Kenney government began, was taking away the ability for the teachers union to be the sole disciplinary body for teachers when there's teacher misconduct, because they gave some horrifically, if you want to search that out on Western Standard, I wrote a number of columns on it, horrifically light sentences, I would call it sentence punishments for teachers who were inappropriate with children, with our children. 2-year suspensions from teaching, and they won't call the police if there's a criminal thing that comes before their eyes. It's disgusting. So I take it out of their hands. It's ridiculous. The teachers union, they have the right to be a union. I mean, look at that, so that they could screw all the Ontario parents and hold them hostage, for a 10, 11% raise during a recession with an illegal strike. Yeah, those teachers unions are great. And the ones in Alberta are the disciplinary body for teachers. So that way the teachers can act up as much as they like, and the union will have their ass covered. Take that ability away. We've got people molesting our kids, and sometimes they're in the education system. And that needs to be exposed when we have to. And that gets on to the Supreme Court decision to strike down the sex offenders registry. Why? Well, I mean, I know why. They fall into these academic discussions. I'm a libertarian. I understand some things, but I also understand that when lines have crossed, you've got to have some sanction and consequences. Having a database of the perverts who screw our kids is not unreasonable. That needs to be challenged. We need to push back on that. We can't register the sex offenders? Really? That's getting beyond the pale? This is not a country with a government that really goes out of its way to respect our individual rights typically, but when it comes to the rights of the perverts, then it's not a problem. There was a story I was tweeting yesterday. If you want to see on Cory B. Morgan on Twitter, that's my favorite playground there, and it's been busy lately. And in Edmonton, a pervert who was a repeat violent rapist was released, and guess what? He, within days of being released, got a hold of a woman, held her hostage, and assaulted her. Gee, who would have seen that coming? This priorities of the state right now are so screwed, so backwards. And we do need to be able to report on these things. So we can't even have a sex offenders registry anymore, apparently, according to the Supreme Court. And, as we'll be talking about that later on the pipeline with the show tonight. But yeah, we'll register firearms owners, we'll register everything else. There it is. Nico pulled up the story. But we can't have a registry for guys like this guy, a repeat sexual offender who we let out, a violent man, and guess what? Within days, he violently hit somebody else. I think maybe these people on these boards who let these guys out, for every person they let out, they should have them stay at their house for the first 3 days that they're free. If they're that confident that these people are safe, billet them, guys. Come on, kick in. We'll pay. $100 a night for you to keep them there. You can be the little halfway house. You think they're safe? Have them babysit your kids. Why are we letting these guys out? The damage is way too much. We got to err on the side of public safety. But again, we can't even have a registry of sex offenders now. The Supreme Court struck it down. And we've got it backwards. I mean, as I said, I'm libertarian. I don't want some crazed police state where people are, incarcerated for life on relatively minor offenses. But when we get to the most odious, the most dangerous, the most violent of offenses, and they're out there, we need to put public safety first, and we got to stop letting these guys out. One of the most read columns I had last year too, and this wasn't even sex offenders, but that was of how I listed 4 different Alberta mothers in the course of 1 year. 1 year in Alberta, 4 mothers were murdered by released offenders. 4 different incidents, one of them with her baby. Why can't we keep these guys behind bars? That price is way too high. I'm sorry, we can only give so much benefit adult. I mean, hey, if it's some nutbar who's flown off the handle and never had a previous record, that's one thing. But when they've been in and out of our system dozens of times, and then they go out and kill somebody again, then it's our fault, or it's our system's fault. But we can't seem to get that sorted out. Get me ranting up too much. So we're going to have something different coming up, and I see him in the lobby. And this is going to be a market commodity report and some talks from Market Commodities Limited and with Jim Boscombe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He's going to let me know. It's the first time he's been on there. And of course, this is very important. We are in the West. We're in a prairie province, and these commodities are very important to us. And we're going to be updating you guys weekly on this with Jim or somebody else from over there. So let's bring Jim in and get an update on things. Hey, welcome to the show, Jim.
Hi, Cory. How are you today?
Good, thanks. Did I destroy your last name?
You know, a little bit, but you're not the first one to do that. So
I'm sorry. I read a dozen emails, but I don't get the pronunciation.
No, that's okay. It's Busicum. So, but you're pretty close.
You're pretty close. I was terrible on my part, but okay, I'll have that fixed. Busicum. Thank you very much. Well, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us. And we do have a lot of viewers and listeners, in the well, there's investors and there's people directly within the ag business. So this is some pretty important discussions to be had. So this is our first discussion. Let's talk about the general market direction then, since the start of the crop year, August 1st.
For sure. Since the start of August, prices have moved up actually quite significantly. We would say that on most major commodities, roughly about $100 a ton. So to equate that into different commodities, barley's moved up roughly about $2.50 a bushel, canola somewhere in that same $2.50 to $3 a bushel, and the wheat markets as well. So significant price increase, which, we do normally see prices increase following harvest time period, August through September. And, but this year, we come out of a very high commodity price market from last crop year when there was shortages due to the 2021 drought, major price correction going into harvest. Starting this crop year, we had some significant things happen. For example, the Canadian dollar lost roughly 8 to 10% of its value over those 3 months, which helps exports out quite a bit. And not only that, farmer selling, as they had room in their bins to store this crop, farmer selling has been somewhat limited as they restock their bins and slowly start to access the market now as we move into November.
So what are some of the current market factors that are affecting the price like right now?
Actually, when it comes to that, I'd like to take a look at some of the things that are happening outside of our local and our domestic market. So one obvious problem is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where a lot of different commodities such as wheat, canola, different commodities come out and supply the world from that area. We're seeing that conflict lead to disruptions in shipments. Albeit, even though that makes the news on basically a daily basis, they are still shipping out of those areas. For example, on Monday, out of Ukraine ports, they actually had their largest shipment day, a record of 350,000 tons left that port. Now, other areas of concern that I think is noteworthy to buyers and sellers is Australia. It's extremely wet there right now in their main producing areas, which is damaging the quality and the supply of the crops that are grown there. And they would be harvesting that, you know, pretty much about right now through December.
Yeah, so I mean, we do have live commenters, you know, asking questions occasionally too. If I could kind of toss one at you out of the blue a bit, though, he was just wondering about perhaps the diesel shortage, if that's going to impact things in the more immediate term.
Yeah, not in the immediate term. I think further out into the first quarter of 2023, I think there's enough diesel to go around right now. So when they talk about, I believe the comments are that the United States potentially could run out of diesel in 25 days. Well, I think to clarify that, that's if you actually didn't produce diesel at all between now and then, right? So we're not going to run out of diesel necessarily right away, albeit logistics are a concern right now. They're extremely tight. The cost to move product from point A to point B are expensive. And fuel is a big part of that.
Okay. Well, are there any further comments you'd want to add for our followers and viewers today?
Well, I think really to the farmers that are listening to this, you grow your crops to market them, to sell those crops. And we've seen 3 months since you've harvested most of those crops. Well, I shouldn't say 3. It's probably more like 6 weeks for a lot of farmers. It's time to start marketing these crops. Plan out your sales accordingly. As I just alluded to before, logistics are extremely tight. A lot of areas across Alberta and Saskatchewan are fairly remote. And in order to have that grain move timely and at fair market value, you need to plan out your sales. So we'd be happy to talk to any of you if you're looking to move that grain.
That's great. And I mean, farming is, well, it's a big business and a complicated one. Like anything else, you want to maximize your product at the best times. And it takes some expert consultation sometimes.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And then we'll talk again next week.
All right. Thanks, Cory. Goodbye.
Thank you. So yes, it's Jim Bozicom. I'm going to rehearse that one a few times before next week. And yes, from Marketplace Commodities, guys. And I mean, it's everything's been volatile. Everything's been up and down. And we do have a lot of ag producers who follow the shows. I've had people on from them as guests before and stuff like that. And it is a business that takes some careful planning. You really want to make the most of what you've harvested and get your best prices for it. And these guys help you out with that sort of thing. So we'll be checking in with them regularly on that. And if you got other questions for them in the ag market and that, send them to me through email next week or whatnot, and we'll get them out to them. So yeah, there's my Twitter account there, Cory B. Morgan. You can see, and that's where it's been interesting watching, when I mentioned earlier with Elon Musk changing things with Twitter. Boy, the left is going bananas. And I don't fully understand a lot of these things. I don't understand how a lot of it works, but I do a lot on Twitter with the algorithms and things. So I've got a Twitter account with a decent amount of following, and it's one of the verified ones. It's got the blue check mark, and when it came really close to the time that Musk was going to buy Twitter the first time before it fell apart, suddenly the engagement was getting high. Suddenly I was getting all sorts of new followers. It was picking up. As soon as that fell apart, back down. And I was lucky to gain 50 followers a week or so. Now, since Musk bought Twitter, in the last 5 or 6 days, I've gained about 600-700 followers. Again, anecdotal, I don't know. But I mean, I haven't done anything different than I did 3 weeks ago. But the thing is, the way things were going, and Twitter never denied it, they shadow ban conservatives. They throttle your reach. They stop other people from seeing your things. I had a regular Twitter follower, and I've had a number of them say, geez, Cory, I'd like to see your tweets, but I actually have to go right to Cory B. Morgan in order to see the tweets. I don't see them in my scroll. I have to search them out. And that's because, see, that's that insidious way that they would manipulate what you see. And you think you're getting a larger view of things, but in reality, they're actually filtering and hiding a whole bunch from you. So suddenly now, I'm guessing, my tweets are becoming visible to a whole lot more people. And I'm getting a lot more negative feedback. Oh yeah, I'm getting all sorts of lefties attacking me. I mean, I've always had them, but I've got even more of them than usual now, which is telling me they're seeing it too. So my reach is getting out farther. And I don't think, I mean, especially the way Musk has been talking, he's not trying to make conservative tweets stand out more. He just took the filters off of them and let it go. And it's showing, and it's showing fast. And it gives me optimism to see what happens. And with how postal the left is going, the temper tantrums they are having shows that they've really enjoyed that slanted platform. And I talked about that the other week too. I mean, Twitter seems overrated in a lot of ways, and it is in a lot of ways. It's a short form thing, but it drives a lot of traffic. It breaks a lot of stories. And whether you like it or not, it drives things. As I said, your average people might not be on Twitter, but the media is all there. The politicians are all there. The decisions makers are there, and it influences them. So the more we can just get word out to everybody, and it's not that hard. We don't need them to filter everything to protect your your sensitive eyes. Block people like crazy. I know people get upset. I don't care. If somebody's on my case and they're being stupid on Twitter, I just block them. There. It's not hard. Somebody's being hateful on Twitter, I block them. They're being nasty just too far, I block them. Just do it. There's some people, oh, you don't respect free speech. Yeah, sure I do. They can speak all they want, just not to me. I don't care. Go yell at a wall. Go yell at a street corner. I'm not interfering in your speech. I'm just telling you, get the hell off my little corner of the platform. It's not that complicated. And new things that Musk's bringing out is apparently you might have to pay $8 a month to keep your blue check. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. But the funny thing was Stephen King just went nuts about, you're going to charge me for it while I'm out. God, King, come on. I read a few of your books that were right crappy. You should have paid me for it. Because he's saying you should be paying me to be on Twitter. Don't let the door hit your ass, Stephen. You're yesterday's man. But, I mean, again, how indignant the left gets. When, oh, my God, he's not changing anything. He's not reducing it. He's just saying we're going to open it up and level the playing field. Boy, they sure like that advantage they had. All right. So a new thing I'm going to be putting out too is the Dingleberry of the Week. I'm giving that award. I'm getting towards the end of the show. And by the way, next week I'm going to be talking, as I said, to an Aboriginal group. And they're Robin, Lauren, Wilfred, Jimmy. They're going to be my guests. And we're going to talk about a project to get a First Nations group getting product to Hudson's Bay. So tune in for that. But the Dingleberry of the Week, yes, somebody's going to earn that every week. And I'm kicking it off. And I'll finish my show with it just so I can rant at one more person to finish things on the right note. And of course, the worthy winner, the first one had to be Justin Trudeau, the first Dingleberry of the Week award. He's welcome to come down here to the Western Standard office and collect it. And the reason this time is just his hypocrisy. It was just shining through so much. There we go. Oh, that's a nice trophy picture. A fine picture of the Dingleberry of the Week. And where Justin said, the suspension of people's rights is something that you should only do in the most exceptional circumstances. And I really hope that politicians call out the overuse of the notwithstanding clause to suspend people's rights and freedoms. And I'm sure he said it in his chiding schoolmarm voice. But the thing is, this is the man who right now we're in the midst of hearings over the suspension of individual rights with the Emergencies Act when he cracked down on bouncy castles. They have the gall to say this. And the reason for this is because the unions are upset because Doug Ford's in a big battle with the teachers' unions in Ontario, and he used the notwithstanding clause. Did Justin ever speak up when Quebec used the notwithstanding clause to step all over the rights of minorities in Quebec and religious minorities? No, of course not. Justin wouldn't call that out. But when a conservative does it, then it's a problem. Yes, Justin, you're a hypocrite, and you are the first weekly Dingleberry of the Week. I'm certain next week some worthy peckerhead is going to earn that award from me, and I'll happily bestow it upon them. Aside from that, tune in tonight, guys, 7 o'clock. We're going to have the pipeline on, and that's going to be Nigel Hannaford and Derek Fildebrand and myself covering some more news stories for the week. Mel Risden, of course, has been doing her fantastic series on Tuesdays. You can watch those drop when they come out. And yeah, we got other stuff all the time. Get on the westernstandard.news, check it out. All sorts of productions, all sorts of things. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. And we'll talk again next week at this time.